Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Call to Adventure podcast with me, George B. I hope you're all good, listeners and watchers. So you'll notice that I've been recording in a few different studios over the last few episodes. So I would love to know what you think, which one was your favourite, and I'm working on one here, and so I think this is going to be the one that we're going to go for. But get in touch on Insta or shoot us a message on calltoadventure.uk. Love to know what you guys think. In other news, I went to go and see The Alpinist on Sunday, and it was incredible. So if you're looking for a good adventure film, I'd say it's kind of like Free Solo, in that you don't have to be into climbing to enjoy it. But my hands were just drenched in sweat. Some of the Free Solo ice climbs and mixed climbs in that were just full banana-ramas. So definitely recommend going to see it.
Sorry.
We're going to keep that in. But Alpinist, go and see it. It's amazing. We'll try not to give any spoilers unless Pete's seen it, and then we'll talk about it later. But we'll tell you if we're going to talk about it. But it's incredible. So now on to today's pod. So today we're chatting with Pete McNeil. So Pete is a bit of a bike nut. He's a mountain bike guide, a bike adventurer, racer, and expedition leader with nearly a couple of decades experience working in the outdoor industry. He's worked as a mountain bike guide right here in the UK, in Spain, Nepal, and even out in New Zealand. Pete's also done a big old cycle tour from the UK out to New Zealand with his wife Alice on their honeymoon, would you believe it, back in 2012, covering 20,000 kilometres through 22 countries over a couple of years. But he's also done some epic self-supported bikepacking races, including the notorious Silk Road mountain race and the Highland Trail 550, which I'm pumped to hear a bit more about. So without further ado, Pete, how's it going?
Hey, nice to speak to you, George. Doing well. A little bit chilly out here in my caravan at the end of the field, but no, I'm doing well.
Yeah, we did have a little chat about that in the intro. So if you see the condensation, it's because Pete's chilling in the caravan at his new property. So it looks very adventure-y anyway, like full down jacket, beanie on.
That's just how I roll, yeah.
So Pete, I was just thinking, like, well, how did we connect? And I think I'd seen you on a couple of different things, maybe as I was following the Silk Road mountain bike race and a couple of other bits and bobs. But then we ended up working together, given that you're a mountain bike guide and doing some cool stuff. So we'll get into it and chat about that later, because I know that you've got some cool things coming up as well. But normally we kick off with a few quick fire questions. So I'll just ask you couple of questions and just go for it. First thing that kind of feels right. Okay, ready?
All right, fire away. Yeah, go on.
Okay, first one, tent or bivvy?
These days, tent, I would say. I do like a bivvy, but generally, if I don't have to be moving super fast, then tents are good. But yeah, I like a bivvy, definitely.
Yeah, I guess you are doing a lot of things that you just want to go. So, although I think you actually had a tent for even some of your like hardcore bike races, right? Didn't you have a tent instead of a bivvy for you took a 2-man tent on the
Silk Road race, definitely, yeah. And I kind of like, it's more of a sort of like, if things went wrong in that kind of environment, then you might be waiting a day or two to get picked up, and waiting for a day at sort of 3,000 meters in a bivvy, that probably wouldn't be that much fun. And I kind of just thought, like, play on the safe side. And I guess, from a weight point of view, you probably carry a tarp if you're carrying a bivvy anyway. So then you've kind of got that sort of, it's not too far off a lightweight tent. Ultimately, I love sleeping out under the stars. That's great. I wouldn't say I always have the best night's sleep in a bivvy. Whereas, like, in a tent, I feel like you've got your little controlled environment, and And yeah, when it's actual necessity to get some sleep, and rather than having the experience of sleeping outside, if it's like as a it's a necessary point, then I kind of feel like tent wins at the moment, and it keeps the midges out, which is a good one in Scotland.
Yeah. Favorite terrain to bike on? You're a gravel man, full mountain biker. What?
No, I mean, like, my heart is always in the sort of the full mountain biking kind of environment. The gnarlier the better, really. So, like, what I like is really hard technical terrain that ideally I can go out and ride day after day after day after day. And that quite often means a bit of Hikebike as well. And I don't really mind that, because it just means that you're getting into places that are worth it. But yeah, like, the more technical, the better from a personal point of view. But I've found that I really enjoy guiding on the gravel. I quite enjoy doing that because it's more accessible to more people, and also you kind of like have more opportunity to chat and kind of have a little bit more about the day, and cover a bit more distance and stuff. So it kind of depends on for me, it's anything. Like, I enjoy riding my bike in any terrain, but I think what gets me like giddy as a schoolgirl is getting just that perfect bit of single track that has to keep you like really sharp and on your wits. And ideally, I'm kind of I've got a tent hanging off my handlebars, and I know that I'm going to be riding the same thing again tomorrow. Like that for me is some slice of heaven, I think.
Yeah. There's something very special about being in that like flow state when it's not too hard, but it's like taking all of you to concentrate to not come off the bike, and then time is just flying, and you get in that like meditative state. It's very, very cool.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned Hikebike before. For people that aren't familiar with Hikebike, what's Hikebike?
Oh, well, it's basically taking your bike for a walk, and just however you choose to do it. There's a few different techniques, but generally speaking, like, I'll put my bike on my shoulders, and take it up at the side of a mountain. It's not everyone's idea of fun, but like I said, it usually it gets you into a place where the riding downhill is far more enjoyable. So yeah, just basically taking your bike for a walk. But I've definitely done some routes which are kind of 90% hiker bike and maybe 10% riding, which probably they're not the stats that you really want at the end of a ride. But it's all about exploring, isn't it? So certainly having the ability to kind of chuck your bike on your shoulder or on your back and hike it up the side of a hill.
Yeah, for people that haven't seen it before, I was pretty surprised at what some people take their bikes up. Like, you would think there's no way you'd go up there with a bike, but people do. So have a Google, take a look. There's some pretty awesome ones. I think 90% hiker biking is a pretty hardcore ratio. I like a little bit because it feels hardcore, but I think I'm out at like 30%. But for sure, it means that you can open up some stuff where you're probably not going to find many others riding there if you've got a decent bit of Hikebike. Do you have a favorite bike at the moment?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's funny. I've been thinking a lot about bike. I mean, I think a lot about bikes anyway, but like the bike industry. I just came back from a trip actually where I rode up to Glasgow for COP26, and I did it on a £30 mountain bike that I bought off Facebook Marketplace, and it was a 1991 Rally Massif, and like, rode it 350 miles up to Glasgow in 3 days, and carried all my kind of wild camper gear and stuff on it. And after like the first day, I kind of realized that it really didn't make that much difference. Like, I was kind of just enjoying that ride. I was riding mostly on the road, a little bit of gravel, and it just felt like riding my gravel bike. And like, not to say that I really enjoy riding my gravel bike as well, but I just kind of thought a bike is a bike, and I kind of yeah, it kind of forced me to think a little bit about it, because I am definitely one of these people that's like N+1. There's always something else that you need, and having said that, I wouldn't choose to ride that on kind of super technical terrain like that kind of bike. And actually, the reason that I rode that Facebook Marketplace bargain up to Glasgow was so I could give it to someone. That was the concept. I would give it to someone when I got it there, and avoid having to like grapple with the trains to get back down again. So it was kind of like testing out an idea, but it proved to me that that the bike doesn't matter so much. Having said that, I guess what I keep coming back to for the sort of riding that I do is like a fairly aggressive hardtail. So like a hardtail is a bike that doesn't have rear suspension. It's got a bit of suspension at the front, and kind of aggressive angles in the sense that it's got quite a slack head angle. And ideally, with quite fat tires. So kind of sort of 27.5 plus sort of wheel size. So you're looking at a kind of 2.8 or 3-inch tire. I find that kind of is a super versatile bike. It kind of reminds me of the hardtails that I've always ridden since I was a kid, and it's a sort of bike that I can take away, for 5 days around the Highland 550, or go to a downhill track and like huck it off drops and and do all that sort of stuff too. And it's like it's hard to think of another bike that you could do all that stuff on. So for me, that bike at the moment is a Sonda transmitter, it's exactly that. It's just this sort of just the sweet spot of like being kind of the right angles, big fat tires, and this kind of bike that you can ride aggressively, but you can also take on kind of pretty long trips. So yeah, I guess that's the sort of my dream bike that I keep coming back to. But give me any bike and I'll probably enjoy riding it, or find a way to enjoy riding it.
Yeah, I think it's good to do that sometimes, isn't it? Like you can ride around on a super fancy bike, and then it's sometimes good to just ride something else. Like we did a mini cycle tour recently in Sweden. I went out to go and see my girlfriend, and we rode from where we used to live on a little island in the southeast of Sweden called Öland up to Stockholm. And I was on one of her dad's like old, you can't really call it a mountain bike, but it had like suspension at the front, and the frame was kind of like a mountain bike. And it definitely works, gets you from A to B. Having said that, she was on one of those, don't really know what you call it, like a Dutch bike. I don't know what the proper name for it is, but
shopping
like where it's
bike kind of thing.
Yeah, a shopping bike. She was on one of those with one gear and some pretty terrible brakes. And whilst it's fairly flat round there, her idea was like, yeah, it'd be great to show people that, you can do this stuff. You don't need loads of money to do it. Bikes are just a great option. Everyone can do it. And then after about 2 days, she was like, I mean, you can do it, but this is a lot harder compared to our like really nice hard tails that we had on our big trip. So it's definitely possible, but it's a bit of a different story, right? It's
yeah, and I guess it's horses for courses, isn't it? Like just finding something that's got the right kind of gears for where you're going and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in my work, like I've guided on plenty of like demo days for like all the big brands, and ridden bikes that cost way more than I would ever spend on a bike, thousands and thousands of pounds. And like ultimately, like once you get past a certain point, like are you going to have like exponentially more fun for every 1,000 more pounds that you spend on a bike? And like in my experience, no. Like it's lovely to kind of try out. I guess it's like being able to drive a Formula One car. You kind of go, wow, this is like the best that it could be, but like you probably don't have the knowledge to kind of get the most out of it anyway for most people. And like I think like a solid hardtail can kind of take you in most places for sure.
Yeah. How did you actually get into biking at the start? Like, what was your journey into mountain biking?
Well, I guess like most people, you grow up just a bicycle represents freedom, doesn't it? It's that sort of like, what you've got to take you around to your friend's house and, take you off on adventures. I was lucky enough to kind of grow up around the countryside in various different places and just going exploring the woods and stuff. So I kind of, I'm probably, I don't know, like 12 or 13 when that transition kind of happened from being like just what I did with my mates to kind of suddenly kind of becoming interested in mountain biking as a thing. And buying the magazines and kind of like looking at what the actual stuff that we were doing probably didn't change very much, but that kind of like association with it as like a hobby or an activity like probably happened around that time, and just going down the woods and hacking around and things like that. I totally remember my first kind of exposure to the idea that you could use a bike as a form of travel. And it was the guy that came into my school to give a talk. His name was Rupert Attlee. And he wrote a kind of probably lesser known cycle touring book called The Trail to Titicaca. And it was about a bike ride that they did across South America, like way back in the like early 90s or late 80s. And he came to my school and did a slideshow and gave a talk, and I was just like sold. Like that was me. And so like that summer I was like, I guess the thing was like I'd been reading, like books by Joe Simpson, the kind of like mountaineering literature, and kind of inspired by it, but also like thinking, well, as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, like I don't have access to this, like living in Dorset, like I don't have access to these kind of adventures. And then kind of heard this guy talk about this cycle tour, and he was riding a bike not too dissimilar to mine. It was just a 90s mountain bike, and I was like, I could totally do that. And like I could just do it from my back door. And so that summer I kind of went to my parents and was like, right, me and my friend Alex, we're going to cycle round the Isle of Wight. And that was our kind of first adventure. But looking back, like credit to my parents to let this kind of like 12, 13-year-old go and do that by themselves and pack up their tent and just kind of go. And we did it. We rode down to Lymington and got the ferry and cycled around the Isle of Wight. It took us like a week. And then from that point onwards, it was like every summer we had to do something more ambitious, and go a bit further or go to a different country or something. So that was definitely like my way into bike travel, I think. And the two things have kind of overlapped and married up together, but kind of there's my mountain biking as a kind of sport, as a hobby, and then there's bike travel. And my dream scenario is where those two things kind of meet in the middle.
Yeah, that's really cool. You were young to start, 12, going on your first bike
I look
tour.
at 12-year-olds now and I'm like, wow, I would not let you go. Like, I don't know, credit to my parents. I was just like, wow, that's super cool.
Yeah. It's such a like powerful experience as well. I think in some ways, kind of the earlier you can get it, it starts to teach you so many things, right? Like valuing things and not being lazy and just like having somewhere to stay and figuring things out for yourself, self-reliance. I think it's a really powerful thing. But I wonder if I would let my 12-year-old go. I think maybe we can use that like, it's different times when we were younger. But
I don't know, maybe it is. I mean, like, obviously now kind of my role is to try and help as many people do take those first steps anyway as possible. And we definitely get like I've helped like quite a few kids who've like wanted to, like, for example, do their like Duke of Edinburgh and stuff on their bikes. And I mean, we were totally clueless as well. Like, I remember being like stranded because we realized that the pump that we had wouldn't fit the valve that we had for our tires. And it was only like weeks later when I got back that I realized that if you just took the end out of the pump and flipped it around. But at the time we didn't know this. So like I had to like go off on a big mission to go and find a bike shop, like, 2 towns along, and get them to pump the tire up. And it was just like, we were totally clueless. But I think it's just one of those things you can be. I think you can, and it can still be like an adventure, and you don't have to go very far. So that was me. That was the moment the bug bit.
You were young to learn that lesson, so we've got a YouTube video that will come out soon that where I learned that. And how old was I? Like 26, and I didn't know that you just swept it round. And I feel when I watch it back, I just feel so stupid. And there's us, we cycle out, and then I'm like, oh, we've bought the wrong adapter, and then we go all the way back to this town that we've just come from that's like miles away. And we hadn't cycled for a couple of weeks because I'd had like knee injuries. We're filming the whole thing, and I just go into the bike shop, and then the guy's like, haven't you been cycling for like 3 months? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, how do you not know this? You just turn it around. And I was like, and it was amazing. So there you go. The earlier you start, the earlier you make
go. You get those out of the way.
The important stuff. Yeah. So how about the mountain bike guiding? Like when did you get into that stuff?
So kind of, I guess, a little bit by accident. Like I did an outdoor studies degree and did that in the Lake District. It was at Ambleside, and I kind of. Well, so the reason I was doing that degree was because when I was younger, I'd kind of like done the application process to join the military, and kind of got my spot as an officer. And they kind of said, well, it'd be good if you went to uni. So I just kind of flipped through the UCAS directory looking for, the course that looked most fun, and outdoor studies kind of sprung out at me, and I was like, okay, well, that's cool, I can do that, and I've got a job at the end of it anyway, so I don't need to worry. I guess what I didn't bargain for was that like those years of kind of being really inspired by some amazing lecturers and things like in this outdoor studies degree, and also meeting like a really eclectic group of people and realizing that you can have adventures in all sorts of different ways, and probably getting like kind of politically a little bit more engaged with what was going on in the world back in 2013. I kind of came out the other end of it being like, well, I don't want to be in the military anymore, and like I kind of, from a sort of political point of view, in the middle of Iraq and Afghanistan, I was kind of like, no, this isn't the route I want to take. So I was kind of left with this gaping hole in my future. And I'd been away traveling, and I kind of thought, well, when I made that decision, I was like, well, if I go back to the Lake District, I'm going to have a floor to crash on. I'm going to have like friends around. So I kind of ended up back in Ambleside, and I was working at a bike shop in Ambleside, a place called Bike Treks, and just realized that I wasn't that good at selling stuff, because I was way more likely to tell someone that the thing that they were already using was probably good enough, and that, why do you need a new bike? Things like this. But what I did really enjoy doing was like leading and taking people out on the shop rides, and in demo days and things like that. And I kind of just thought, well, I much prefer riding with people than selling people bikes. So while I was there, I did my kind of qualifications up in the lakes, and really then was kind of like, well, how do you get a job as a mountain bike guide? Like, it just seemed like such a kind of a far-flung thing, like something that other people did, and I didn't really know my way in. So just started kind of putting a few feelers out, and I saw a job advertised out in Andalusia in Spain, and I was like, that looked amazing. If I could, just ride bikes and drink beer in the sunshine as a kind of 22-year-old, 23-year-old, that would be ideal. And so I just put an application in for it and got the job like based on that. So that was really kind of my first proper guiding job. And it was, full-time, accommodation included, just doing the seasons out there. And, at times it's pretty tough because you kind of 5 days back-to-back guiding, 1 day transfer in between, and then you've got another group out. And some groups that would come out were super cool, just like riding with your friends, and others were really hard work, as with anything. But I guess just doing a couple of years of that just kind of cemented me of like, well, I know what I'm doing now. Like this is something which is actually kind of my career as opposed to a hobby. and it was after that point that me and Alice decided to go and cycle off to New Zealand. But kind of coming back from that, I found it much easier to kind of just go, well, of course I should be getting hired to do kind of mountain bike guiding jobs because, I've got more experience than most people I know. And so I definitely think that Spain job was like kind of what solidified it for me, and doing it for, like a good few seasons, kind of, it gave me a lot of experience, I guess.
And for people who are listening, who are thinking about maybe going into mountain bike guiding, any advice for them as they look to go into it? You mentioned a little bit there about how it's great. Some groups are really cool. Some are a lot tougher work, as you'll get with everything when you work with people, right? But any other bits of advice for people who are thinking about going into it or trying to get into mountain bike guiding?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that shop work is a really good way into the bike industry. Like, it gives you kind of like a knowledge of like, your way around a bike. And like, it's also, if you do that at the same time as like maybe try and get your qualifications, then it gives you lots of opportunities. You can always guide kind of free shop rides, or, set something up, or just do stuff that kind of allows you to build up your logbook, and get that experience in place. Because like, I think there's lots of people who are really competent mountain bikers who like, look, it's different guiding. It's the same with anything. Like, you can be very competent, but you're not necessarily a good guide, because your focus really has to be on the needs of the clients, and showing people a good time and making sure that they enjoy the ride, but also if there's any kind of issues, mechanical or accidents and stuff, like, you need to be able to kind of not just get people back. I think that's like the minimum you can do. Like, you get people back and still have like the majority of people having like the best day ever. Like that's like what really kind of makes a good guide. So the more you can practice that, the better. And yeah, if I think working in a shop kind of really gave me the opportunity to dial that in and to practice, at the same time as doing my quals. In terms of it's difficult in the UK, I think, like to try and get like a full-time job. It seems to be that everyone's either kind of freelancer, or you're kind of working out of like a center, like an outdoor center, where mountain biking might just be part of your role. And quite often the work is with the kind of the more kind of beginner end of the market. So yeah, the dream of kind of like, riding kind of hard technical trails day in, day out, and just doing what you love to do is not necessarily like an easy reality to kind of get, unless you kind of do something like, go and do seasons somewhere. And so that's probably another way in, once you've kind of got a bit of experience, and, just badger people, like just put your name out there. But what a lot of people, I've now had lots of people ask me for work. And what a lot of people don't realize is that with the internet, a company can seem like a really well-established kind of big company, whereas actually it's just one person. And so when people, I got, within my first couple of months of running Adventure Peddlers, I think I probably had more people ask me for jobs than I had clients. And it's kind of like, well, I don't even, make enough out of this to kind of support myself, let alone kind of have another person. So I think just being kind of, do a bit of research and be aware, like when you're kind of applying for companies and trying to get jobs. But like, it's obviously a bit of a competitive world, and you're doing a job that a lot of people would probably do for free. And that's always a tough place to be, because you've always got some people who maybe retired or they don't need the work, who are kind of happy to go out and do mountain bike guiding because it's what they find fun. And it's tough because that like undervalues the people who are actually trying to make it a career. But there are ways, definitely, for sure.
Yeah. And how about your actual tour then? So you've done a lot of different stuff, but your tour sounds pretty awesome. Couple of years, UK to New Zealand. Interesting honeymoon experience. You've obviously got a really cool wife. How did that all come about? She's obviously into riding as well.
Well, actually, no, she wasn't. Like at the beginning, I'd got that job in Spain. We'd moved out to Spain together. So we'd already been living like kind of fairly isolated in a little like Andalusian mountain village for like a couple of years. So we were kind of like, pretty comfortable with each other and like our own company at that point. And we were sort of just one day contemplating what we might be doing next. And Alice had said, she'd really like to go back to New Zealand. She'd spent a bit of time there before. And I'd always had the idea to do a big bike trip, like ever since I was that kid, like that 12, 13-year-old. Like I was kind of like, I want to go and go around the world or ride across America. And I'd come up with different plans at different stages in my life. And it hadn't quite happened, for one reason or another. And so when she sort of said, "Oh, I quite like to live in New Zealand," I just kind of flippantly said, "Shall we cycle there?" And she just said, "Yeah." And I for the next couple of weeks, I was like, "Are you sure? I mean, I'm kind of serious. Are you serious?" And after a while, she just got annoyed with me bugging her about that, and she was like, "Yes, we're doing it, right? Like, just leave it out." So then we kind of just set about trying to, save some money and kind of, put things in place, and we'd set our date for leaving because we were like we wanted to get over some of the big mountain ranges, so we kind of had to work back from when the passes were open and stuff like this. And it was only a bit later that we decided that what would be the best way to get everyone to come to our leaving party. And we were like, well, let's get married, and then everyone has to come to our leaving party. And so the idea of getting married, the idea of it being a honeymoon, actually came quite a long time after, like, we were kind of planning to do the trip. And as it turned out, it was a fantastic way to do it. Like, we had this kind of amazing send-off party. But also, people, when they were kind of like, "Oh, what should we get you for your wedding present?" We were like, "Right, we need a tent and sleeping bags and this and this." So like our wedding list was basically our kit list for that trip. So it kind of worked out pretty well in the end.
That's awesome. What a cool way to do it.
Yeah. Like, not that was the only reason we got married, like to get a new sleeping bag. But there were some people that were like, "Oh, you sure you want to get married before you go on this bike trip? Like, maybe afterwards would be a better idea." But like I said, we were pretty solid by the time we got to that point. But yeah, Alice hadn't done really very much cycling at all. She'd been more of a rock climber when I met her, and she'd done a bit while we were out in Spain because that's what we were doing. But like, we started doing like 30, 40 kilometer days in the Netherlands, and there would be tears at the end of it. We were like going really slowly, and it just went to show that you keep doing something for months and months and months, and eventually it's just like it becomes, our fitness levels definitely balanced out. And I think what it gave me was just, if I had done that kind of trip by myself, I would have been in a rush. Like, I think we met lots of like solo young male cycle tours on the road, and they all seem to be a little bit in a rush. Like, okay, I've got to do 100 miles a day. And I totally understand that, because I've since done, exactly that, like kind of tried to push myself and done the kind of the physical thing. But the fact that we were doing it as a couple, and the fact that it was our honeymoon, meant that we enjoyed doing shorter days. We enjoyed sometimes just waking up and being like, "Oh, we're in a beautiful camp spot. How much food have we got? Okay, we've got enough food. Should we just stay here for the day and just read our books and sit in the sunshine?" And, and doing that, and also just, talking to so many people and always saying yes to invitations, kind of led it to be a totally different trip to the one that I would have probably done by myself. And it kind of taught me a huge amount more because of that, like just a totally different style. So yeah, we took 2.5 years. Well, no, we do like 2 years of riding to get to New Zealand, and I think we averaged like 50k a day or something like that, like really not big distances. And like I say, it was because we were, probably spending as much time off the bike as we were on the bike, and just the adventure was so much more than just about cycling, and I think that kind of taught me a lot, and it's what we've kind of tried to tell other people about, like afterwards. Like, it doesn't have to be about like big physical challenges, even though when you say I've cycled 20,000 kilometers, people go, oh my god, I could never do that. It's like, actually you could. Like, it's not difficult, you just have to give yourself long enough. And that's the thing. Like, so yeah, that I think was the kind of the big eye opener of that trip for me.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think a great way to look at it. And one of the things when I look back now, after being really busy before our bike trip, and I used to work in finance in London, and had always been like pretty busy, and then had like looked forward to this bike trip, kind of similar thing. I got the idea from a mate, Henry, who'd cycled to Sydney from the UK. So I was like, I want to do a big bike trip, but do something different, because he's already smashed that. And then Alaska to Argentina is like another one that's similar distance. And then just kind of had the idea, wrote it on the whiteboard, and then I told my girlfriend, I was like, what do you think? And then she was just like, yeah, I guess we could. And then it didn't really feel real, and then it just kind of kept settling in, and we're getting more and more excited. And then we finally went, and it kind of felt surreal. Quit the job, and then left, and then you're on the plane out to Alaska, and you're thinking, holy shit, like we're actually starting like a giant bike trip, and we weren't cyclists really beforehand. But I really appreciate like what you said about how the trip was a lot more because you cycled slower, because I think probably I would have got more into the doing just by yourself. I don't know, whatever it is, as a bloke, for lots of reasons, you probably end up doing the 100-milers and getting there. And we only ended up getting halfway in 18 months. So we finished in Panama for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, we went a lot slower than anticipated. But one of the things that I look back now, and now that I'm really busy again with life, as most people are, the one of the most important and special things was just having that time. Like, we never have that in adult life, really, in Western society now, and it's so unbelievably precious to like not have much to do, and to be able to just read a book, or to say yes to things, not to always have to be rushing around. And I think our mental health, in lots of ways, it was like very challenging, and always finding a new place to sleep, and you always have to be kind of on with new people. There's lots of challenges to it as well, but there's something about just knowing that all you've got to do is ride your bike 50 kilometers today, and it's just incredible. And if you don't want to, then it's okay. You can just stay where you are, and like you say, accept the invites from strangers to go to a barbecue, or go to some guy's kids christening who you met 15 minutes ago, and they want to invite you out for tacos. And it's such a special thing that I think will stay with us forever, and it's always good to remind yourself
I think
of.
No one can really point the finger at you and say, well, most people anyway, like, wouldn't point the finger at you and say, look, you're doing nothing with your life, because everyone's always bowled over by the fact that you've ridden for like a year in one direction, and they're just like, oh my god, that's amazing. And actually it's kind of like, again, like, the people, I wish I could be that motivated. And it's like, in a lot of ways, this is the laziest thing I could think of doing, because like, I don't need to think about anything that's going on. And like you say, it's a privilege. It's like, for us, it was like, like I guess the narrative we told ourselves was that like we were in the middle of a recession anyway. We set off in 2012. All our mates were kind of clinging on to jobs that they didn't really like anyway. So we were just like, we didn't have a lot of money, and for that reason as well, always wild camping, like always needing to find people like to help us out, really. Like, certainly going through Europe and stuff, we were on about €6 a day budget. But it meant that, that whole 2-year trip was like less than the price of a small car. Like, it was like, and so when people kind of said, well, I wish I could afford to do this. It's like, well, you can just sell the car you're driving. That's all you need to do, and then you can go. But yeah, that indulgence, I think, is probably the word. It took us a little while to get used to it. I remember the first probably month, and I think it was kind of weird because we started from home, so we didn't get out to like South America to begin with, and in our heads, like all the planning, most of which incidentally kind of went out the window at some stage on the trip, like, but all of the kind of the planning and kit and the ideas were all about things like the Pamir Highway in Tajikistan, and like cycling over the Himalayas, like all that was what was in the front of our minds. And then we started by getting the ferry from Newcastle to Amsterdam, and we were riding through the Netherlands, kind of being like this sort of cognitive dissonance of like, this isn't Tajikistan. Like, it's kind of like, and then kind of feeling, because we'd been so busy planning a wedding and stuff as well, like before we left, we were just like, what are we doing? We should be doing something. And kind of, we put way too much pressure on ourselves to begin with. And it definitely took like, I mean, this is how slow travel goes, isn't it? But like, it probably took us the first month to kind of settle into it, right? And then just to kind of go, right, okay, you just got to roll with it. That's probably when it kind of really found its rhythm, rather than kind of beating yourself up because you haven't got far enough or things like this. Like, you just kind of, like you say, realize that all you've got to do is just keep generally moving in one direction. And in some ways, a lot of the time, that didn't feel that adventurous either. Like, I definitely remember points of the trip where we were like, we need to start having an adventure. And then it's kind of like, stand back a little bit, and we're cycling across the desert in Uzbekistan, and like, we'd ridden there from Europe, and it was like, but we need to start having an adventure soon. Like, and it's like, I guess it taught me so many things, and definitely one of them was that that idea of adventure is a state of mind for a lot of ways. Like, in a lot of ways, like, you can be having what a lot of people would consider the adventure of a lifetime and not necessarily feel like it. But at the same time, you can, go out of your back door and sleep in the woods, in the middle of a city, and it totally feels like it. So it just kind of gave us a lot of perspective on a lot of things, and for that reason, it changed my life. It changed our lives. And it's kind of informed everything that we've done since. And what's been super cool is, like, after coming back and giving a few talks and kind of just spreading the word a little bit, we've had people who've literally quit their jobs and kind of gone, like, come back to us like 6 months or a year or whatever later and be like, you guys, you inspired us to go off and do this, and now we've done it and it's changed everything. And it's like, yeah, it'll do that. And that, for me, is like, that kind of giddy moment that you just realize that you've helped make a difference in someone's life. And so that's definitely what I try and do as much as possible now, on whatever scale that's appropriate.
Yeah, really cool. Did yours go fairly without a hitch or any close calls?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends how you look at it. Like, on some levels, yes. We didn't get held up at gunpoint or any of that stuff, and people were like, oh, did you ever feel threatened? And like, no, not really. But we had a few injury issues. So Alice's back spasmed quite severely for the first time, like, on the border with Afghanistan, on the Pamir Highway in a place called Korog. And she literally just woke up one day and couldn't stand up straight, like, physically just couldn't straighten up her body, and kind of remained that way for about 18 days. And we were in this like little frontier town in the middle of nowhere. And yeah, I mean, looking back, if you'd have told me before we started the trip that we would be stranded on the Afghan border, like in a place where, the year before, and I think the year after as well, like, they had like civil war, I would probably kind of go, wow, like in a sort of slightly starry-eyed and also terrified kind of idea of like, well, that's going to be like this crazy adventure. But again, the reality of it was that, you know, we just hung out on this balcony on the guest house that they'd let us put our tent on the balcony, and we met loads of other cycle tourists that kind of came past. Fortunately, one of the guys, Pete, he was an Irishman. He was a GP back in the UK, and so kind of he was able to assess, or with the help of like some, you know, Skype calls like to colleagues, like assess her and make sure that it wasn't kind of like a trip ender. And yeah, we kind of just stayed put for that, and we got going again, and then it happened again. Actually, just on again in the worst place, on like the second highest pass in the world between Leh and Manali, in the Indian Himalayas, and yeah, she just woke up one morning and couldn't stand up, and then on that occasion we had to hitchhike to get ourselves down because the sort of snow was coming in. And thinking now, all of those things seem like huge hitches. Of course, you know, we had to take a month off the bike. We weren't sure whether or not we'd start again. Actually, the only way we could start again was by dismantling our two touring bikes and building a tandem in Kathmandu. And for the first time, either of us had ridden a tandem was like out of the center of Kathmandu in order to, so that Alice didn't have to like handle the weight of the bike. And all these things seem like, you know, big hurdles to overcome, and like, you know, adversity to kind of battle through. But again, at the time, it was just life. It's just what we were doing, and kind of just dealt with it. So it's, yeah, that, I suppose that's probably quite a long-winded answer to that question. But,
no, I think
it didn't feel like there was too many challenges, but now I look back, you know, there definitely were, for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting because you've done both the kind of cycle touring and bike packing, bike racing stuff, and there's not that many people who do both. There's people who really enjoy travel by bike, but they do it for the kind of cultural experience, or there tends to be people who they love biking and they're just like, I want to stay on my bike for as long as I can, and they love the racing. So it's interesting that you've done both. How was what's the experience like of, say, doing the Silk Road mountain race? So it's 1,700 kilometers in Kyrgyzstan, 26,000 meters of climbing, and it's mainly off road. So it's a bit of a monster. What's it like?
I guess like it's another way, in a strange sort of way, it's another way of being completely indulgent and ignoring everything else that's going on in the world. And obviously you can't legitimately refer to an experience like that as lazy, but on some level, like, that's how I see it. It's like, it's allowing me to block out absolutely everything that's going on in my life. And I think it was definitely coming back from that trip. Speaking to a lot of people who've come back from big cycle tours or big long adventures of any kind, there is that aftermath, and it's something that we don't always talk about too much, but there's this kind of process that you go through, and I struggled for sure, for at least a year, although you could probably say I was still struggling on some level now, of just fitting back into society. And you go from your life being very simple and feeling like you're quite outside of normal society, to all of a sudden having to deal with things like tax bills and internet, and how many different kinds of washing up liquid there were in the supermarkets to choose from, and all of that kind of stuff. And so I needed, when we came back, I needed something else to kind of aim for, and our circumstances were that we couldn't just disappear again and carry on, and not that we kind of wanted to either at that stage, but I needed something else to aim for, and it needed to kind of fit in to life. And so, but at the same time, I wanted something equally as challenging and big and kind of ambitious. So a friend of mine had done this Highland 550, and I kind of thought, that's a test, like, a big race like that. And I entered it just kind of really just hoping that I could complete it. It was something that I kind of, I thought I would test myself. I probably, if I did complete it, I probably wouldn't have to do anything like that again. Like, that was it. And I did it that first year and kind of got around a bit quicker than how I expected to. Certainly did, longer days than I'd ever done before. And rather than kind of thinking, that's it. Like, at the end of that first year, I was kind of like, how do I go faster next year? That was like the first thing that cropped into my head, was like, right, okay, if I didn't sleep as much then, or if I carried a bit lighter kit, or if I did this, and it was just like, all of a sudden, again, that was just like the bug had bitten. And so kind of signed up to do the Highland 550 again, and at the same time kind of heard about this Silk Road mountain race kind of that was starting up. And actually, Kyrgyzstan was a place that we cycled through on our trip, and it was probably the one country I kind of regretted a little bit, because just for various reasons, we were looking to try, and we had a lot of like admin to sort out, so we were kind of like just rushing to get through Kyrgyzstan so that we could get to the capital Bishkek and kind of work out our visas, and we had friends to meet and things like this. And so I totally felt like we didn't do the country justice. Usually we would go the kind of the route least traveled and like try and get off the beaten path and stuff. And in Kyrgyzstan, we just took the main road and went straight through the country, and probably didn't enjoy it that much. And I felt like we'd done this amazing country a bit of a disservice. So when I saw that there was one of these bikepacking races out there, I was like, wow, that sounds like an amazing adventure, but it also allows me to kind of go back and kind of settle that score a little bit, and just kind of feel like I kind of experienced that place as best as I could. So yeah, I mean, the experience of doing that kind of racing is, I don't know, it's, the best way I can describe it is this kind of like reckless abandon that you get, that if you want to, like, when I was younger perhaps, but like on a night out or at a festival or something, and you're like, I really should go to bed, I'm gonna regret doing this all-nighter, but actually that feeling of when the sun comes up and you're still out and partying and just having a great time, like, you go to think, well, future Pete will just have to deal with it. Like, I'm having too much of a good time. And that is kind of the same way I feel about the sort of self-supported racing. Like, you're doing stuff that ultimately you're going to pay for. Like, your body's going to hate you for the fact that you've just ridden like for 24 hours straight or whatever. But like, somewhere in you, it kind of gives you that that kind of just feeling of reckless abandon. And from a kind of mental point of view, it definitely kind of it found that there was like an itch to scratch, and in those ways they're quite addictive, because you come back and then you're like, okay, like, for a little while I don't need to do anything else. I'm really pleased with like the kind of the challenge that I set myself, and I've kind of achieved that. And then after a few more months, you're kind of like, okay, what's next? When am I going to get another chance to do that? And it takes its toll, because like, I couldn't feel my feet for about 6 months after doing that Silk Road mountain race. Like, there's like all sorts of nerve damage and like back's not been right since and all that sort of stuff. But it kind of mentally, I think, like, the fact that it's a race for me isn't that important from a kind of competitive point of view, but it's a format that allows you to push yourself to the point where you get these kind of crazy flow states of, I mean, it's how people kind of describe like really intense meditation and stuff, for me anyway, like, where I have this kind of detached feeling of being like a kind of a river flowing through a landscape, or some kind of crazy stuff like this. And you do big days, and you can get slightly kind of hallucinogenic states of like tiredness. And like, I wouldn't push myself. Well, I can't find a place to push myself that hard unless it's in the context of a race. If I'm going out by myself, I might do a big day, but at some point I'm just going to think, oh, okay, I'm tired now, I'm going to get in bed. Whereas like in that kind of racing context, it kind of just allows you to push that little bit further, which kind of gets you into this kind of strange and magical zone, like where you just feel very at one with the landscape, and I think that's where for me anyway, that's where their kind of beauty lies. And yeah, you pay the price in the long run, but yeah, mentally I think they're quite special experiences.
Really cool. I would love to do one day. You're in a weird way selling it. Who's riding these? Is it invite only, or how do you get to take part?
Look, so there's lots of them now, and I think this kind of self-supported scene is just a really fast growing part of biking. And I don't think it's anything new. I mean, I think it's probably got more in common with the sort of the original Tour de France kind of riding at the late 19th, 20th century, kind of those pictures, black and white pictures of people carrying like a spare tire around their shoulder and staying in kind of B&Bs around France whilst kind of shooting down a brandy at the start line and getting off on your kind of that kind of Wild West sort of cycle racing. I think is kind of probably where it has its roots, really. So I don't think it's anything new, but I think the way that GPS has kind of revolutionized how you can create an event. Like you can literally just put a route out there, and in the case of something like the Highland 550, it's just a group of people that happen to meet in a car park, and will ride this route and may or may not compare times afterwards. Like it's certainly not a race, like that kind of thing. Like it's all fairly underground. Whereas like I guess like Nelson's events, like the Silk Road Mountain Race and Atlas Mountain Race, and they're probably that little bit more ambitious in terms of where they're set, and so kind of lend themselves a bit more to checkpoints and support vehicles and therefore sponsorship and a little bit more media coverage and stuff as well. Most of them are it's certainly amateur, very amateur, in the sense that there's very seldom any kind of prize money, usually no entry fee to do them, although sometimes you pay a bit of a fee to do it. But the mix of people is really eclectic because of this. Like it's kind of you've got people who will literally just try and get round within the allotted time, who are just kind of totally regular, not even mega endurance athletes, just people that want the challenge. And then you've got the people who are winning these things, who are to all intents and purposes like incredible elite athletes, but like take for example like Sufjan, who's winning a load of this stuff at the moment. He was like a cycle courier in France, but like there's been examples of pro riders getting smashed out of the water in these events, like people coming from the Tour de France and stuff, and just not being able to deal with the kind of like riding very fast for a couple of days, but then kind of not being able to deal with the hardships of sleep deprivation and being self-supported and sleeping in a ditch and stuff. So within that kind of within a field, you've probably got people who are just kind of hobbyists, or people that have been on a cycle tour who kind of fancy having a go at something a bit more challenging, all the way up to total crazy individuals who I certainly have kind of come close enough to that I realize I will never be one of these guys, don't have that sort of like 1,000-yard stare and that ability to just kind of really push yourself. And Yeah, so I think everyone finds their own place in it, and like I say, it's getting more popular now. But I think the general format is pretty makeshift, like homemade kind of racing, and that's what I love about it. It's this kind of underground thing. Having said that, quite often when you do apply, you kind of have to show that you are, certainly for the more remote races, like you have to show that you're capable of looking after yourself. So for me, when I kind of first signed up to the Highland 550, I kind of said that I just got back from cycling to New Zealand, and that did it as a kind of like, okay, well, you probably can look after yourself, sort of thing. So yeah, there's usually a bit of like a filtering process to make sure people are going to be all right. But in terms of the kind of people that do it, it's really varied, and a lovely kind of group of dirtbags like that are all inspirational parts of that in their own right.
Yeah, I love that idea of the kind of the good old days. I think I'm doing a lot of climbing now, and it's really changed from, you see what climbing used to be, like the full dirtbag kind of dropouts of society, just doing climbing as a kind of way to escape. Whereas now it's been very much formalized in a sport, and it's in the Olympics, and it's changed, and there's an interesting tension there. But one of these bike races sounds good. I'm gonna have to have a look at an easy one and do one day. But for people who are looking to, say, getting to bike packing and do their first trip, what's kind of the bare minimum? What bike, just easy stuff? What bike should they go for? And what is the bare minimum that they need to get out and just have their first bike packing adventure? If they're like, yeah, this sounds cool, I'm not ready for the Silk Road yet, but I just want to go out this weekend and have a raz.
Yeah, I mean, look, like I say, this trip that I just did, really kind of looked at that and kind of examined like how little you could get away for. And my challenge really was, I wanted to go up to Glasgow to COP26, and my challenge was to get there, and including the buying of the bike, I wanted to get there for less than my train fare cost me to get back. So to kind of really present it as like a viable travel alternative, because at the end of the day, we talk about bike packing and these kind of sport elements of cycling. At the same time, it is just a mode of transport, and it's a kind of underappreciated mode of transport. I don't know if you found this, like after you get back from like a big journey on a bike, you start to think of distance differently. Like if I thought, oh, I'm 200 miles from London, I'd be like, oh, okay, so I could ride that in like 2.5 days. Like, whereas now, obviously, I think, okay, that's going to take me, a couple of hours to drive. And I really like thinking, just changing your perception. And I think there's lots of good reasons why more people should think about journeys in that way, because, public transport's really expensive, and from an environmental point of view, we kind of can't just be thinking about driving our own cars all the time for everything. And so, obviously the bicycle, for me anyway, it's the most efficient mode of transport that humans have ever invented. You can go long distances on it, and it doesn't just get you from A to B, but it gives you this kind of nature connectedness, and kind of gets you talking to people that you would never normally talk to, and all these kind of good things. So I think it, from a kind of point of view of like just a tool for traveling around, if you had, like I did, I got onto Facebook Marketplace, bought a perfectly good like old mountain bike for £30. There was really nothing wrong with it at all. Like I changed the pedals because I preferred clip-in pedals, but other than that, I didn't really change anything on it. And then you can strap some kit to it, and I've definitely been on lots of bikepacking journeys, probably before bikepacking was a thing, where like a dry bag bungeed to the handlebars and the seat would pretty much do it. Equally, like I know it's sort of the image of bikepacking is using these kind of specially made bags, but you can get a rack, like, and just kind of, strap a shopping bag to it. I met people cycling across continents that had kind of just bought a cheap bike in China and strapped baskets to the side of it and were kind of halfway across Asia making their way back. So like there's totally loads of ways you can do it. But I would say, from a point of view of making your life easy, like we spoke about gears before, like making sure that you've got a bike that's got some gears on it. So like when I bought that bike to go up to Glasgow, I was kind of like, should I get like a vintage road bike? I was like, no, because like I have gone across Yorkshire and Northumberland and the Scottish borders, and I knew the route was hilly. So I was kind of like, old road bike gearing would totally destroy me. So for that reason, a mountain bike is a good idea, because you can stick it in an easy gear, and they're generally pretty comfortable to ride for people. So and then in terms of the kit that you need, some simple bags. Bike packing bags do make life a lot easier. We hire them out to people because we don't believe that people should buy new stuff for every trip that they do. You can either do that, or you can just get some relatively cheap bags, or take an existing dry bag and strap it to your bike. But in a very simple sense, you need a sleeping bag or bivvy, and some clothes, and that's about it, really. Like you can go and certainly just have a night out in the woods pretty much like that. I think once you do it a couple of times, you'll be like, oh, okay, that didn't work very well, this worked much better, like I could do with this, like, oh, it'd be nice to have a stove. You start building things in as you have that experience. But in terms of like just going out and having a go, like really it is very, very simple. But what I find a lot with my work now is that a lot of people see barriers. A lot of people see like, oh, I don't have the right kit. It's the amount of people that said to me like, oh, I'd love to give bike packing a go, but I need to buy the right bike first. And it's like, you totally don't. Like you can just, if you have a bike, you can do it. Like you can just strap some bags to it and go. And then you'll figure it out. You'll figure out what you kind of prefer doing. If you want to go for a bit longer, take a tent maybe. But I think just starting out small, and just kind of experimenting, even if it's just riding a few K into your local woods, sleeping in a bivvy and coming back for breakfast the next day, like that will teach you so much, and it will give you so much of a novel experience. And it might not always be pleasant. It might not always be the kind of like you see it on Instagram. But actually, I think with a bit of reflection, you'll kind of see that it's valuable, these experiences. And then once you realize you can get from A to B, like then all of a sudden, the world's your oyster. And I think if more people kind of realize that, we'll be in a slightly better place, in a lot of ways.
So there we go. Easy to get out on your first or next bike packing adventure. Pete, thanks so much for coming on. It's been really awesome to chat, hear a bit about your biking escapades, and I'll look forward to. We'll have to go for a ride at some point. I'll come up and we'll go for a little bike packing adventure. But yeah, it's been really awesome to chat. So thanks for taking the time. It's been great.
I mean, let's make some plans for this year as well, with some more call to adventure stuff.
Yeah, sounds good. So if you want to go and take a ride out with Pete and go and see what he's doing, then head over to calltoadventure.uk and you can book on some trips there. Just look at bike packing stuff. But otherwise, Pete, thanks again for coming on. Listeners, thanks for tuning in. So until next time, thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.